video working. So I'm going to try a little something different today. Instead of filming the screen that's hard to see and I kind of lose track of, I'm just going to let y'all know where we are. And that way, if you're watching this, you can have like the, that slide up. And that way I could use props and kind of do how I'm used to teaching in the past. So I think this way it will work well. In other words, if I tell you where I'm at and in the background, you can kind of see where we're at, then I don't have to have it up here. We can't see that anyway if anybody watches the video. So, all right. So how do we progress? How do we go from movement strategies to simple machines? It's all tied in together. If you notice, some of the movements that we were discussing last class were what we call unloaded. So, when we're talking about the boxing, the jab, we were talking about volleyball, how like a bump would be a lot more simultaneous because you're trying to be accurate with it, or a set would be more simultaneous because you're trying to be accurate with it, but a spike would be more sequenced because you're trying to make the ball go faster, right? At the expense of accuracy, getting into the net, that kind of stuff. But as we know, it starts to get a little confusing when we start becoming unloaded. In other words, we start using equipment, because that equipment is kind of not part of us, and there are some different dynamics with things that may seem that it's for speed, but in reality, we need a lot of strength. And that's because there's leverages and there's levers involved. And so like the analogy I'm going to give you today, and then we'll apply it into the different things, is like if you were swinging the longest baseball bat in the universe. So a baseball bat has its moment of inertia. The way the stuff is distributed is obviously not even. Like if you take a bat and you spin it in the air, it's going to wobble because there's more stuff further away. And as we know, the further away something gets for us, the harder it is to move it, right? So I know this is a lightsaber, but it represents that for the barrel of the bat, there's more stuff away than for our hands. In addition, the intent, if we're trying to hit the ball to make the ball go fast, the bat has to go fast. So to make something that has a rotational disadvantage to us go fast, we kind of have to take advantage of some leverage concepts. So the concept is that with levers, and we're going to get into the different ones, so I'm just going to show you how this works, that my hands have to be very strong. I have to supply a lot of force on one end so that the other end can take advantage of some speed. Does that make sense? So there are some different factors when you're getting into your area of interest that might have rackets or clubs, or where it may look like everything is sequenced because the distal end of the club or the bat has to go fast, but it may actually be more simultaneous to us because it takes a lot of force to produce what's needed for that mechanical advantage for that lever. Okay? Does that kind of fit in a broad sense? Does that kind of make sense that sometimes, even though we're trying to make the bat go fast, we got to make our hands be strong? Kind of makes sense? All right. So the levers in general and serve functions of simple machines. And there's simple machines that we use out in the real world. And then when we come into the body, we're going to see how for our body, it's mostly levers and pulleys. We have inside our bodies, mostly levers and pulleys. But the reason I wanted to kind of introduce you to all of them is because, again, in your area of interest, like you may be interested in cycling. And so you may talk about how the bicycle works, right, to help you go. So I just wanted to introduce you to kind of these simple machines: pulleys, levers, wheel and axes, wedges, inclined planes, and screw. So a test question that would be super fair: which of the following is not a simple machine? I mean, so just know, just be aware that these exist. I'm not asking you to write a dissertation on it. Just be familiar with the forms of a simple machine, okay? So there's 6 types of simple machines that we just talked about. And what I like about this slide is it gives kind of another real world example of how we would use it. I I love like for the lever, you know, pulling out a nail where, you know, like you pull one way and the bottom goes down so that the nail comes up. You know, we're going to talk about those different advantages. But again, for our bodies, we're really looking at levers and pulleys. But in your area of interest, there may be some different simple machines that come into play for your sport or activity. Okay. All right. That's basically just telling you what I'm telling you about levers. And okay, so each type of levers serve multiple functions of a simple machine. Okay? So types of machines in the body, we have levers and pulleys, and they serve multiple functions. One or more. I don't want to say they serve multiple. That's not fair. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about those functions of simple machines, or these advantages, and we're going to use super layman's terms. I'm going to give you examples of each, and then we'll talk about some examples in the body. Okay. First of all, to balance different forces in our body, whether it's with one leg, whether it's the other leg, or both legs, you're constantly maintaining your center of mass over your base of support. In fact, I remember this was crazy. There was a big debate at a conference. I was in grad school, so I wasn't say nothing. I was just listening to people. And they were talking about the difference between static and dynamic balance. And that gets crazy because there's all these differences there. And one guy finally said, there's no such thing as static balance. In other words, like your center of mass is constantly swaying. It's impossible. You may think you're not moving, but you're constantly shifting, you know, your center of mass. But then it comes like, okay, well that's cool. But what about if you're doing that on a skateboard? Like there's different scenarios where it's like more dynamic and less dynamic. So I know it's semantics. But for our body, we balance multiple forces. And that could be gravity pulling down on us, but also different muscle groups. So what I mean by that is when I'm balancing on one foot, if you notice, this constant inversion and eversion is maintained by literally my inverters and everters kind of pulling like a teeter-totter, right? Like, okay, a little bit more, but it's almost like a level. You know the level where like there's a bubble in the middle of the level? And it's almost kind of like you're trying to keep that bubble level. And so like, oh, no, back this way, right? You're constantly trying to keep the marble in the middle. So multiple forces could be like inverters is a group of forces, and everters is a group of forces, and gravity through your center of mass. And so that's what they mean by two or more forces. So it doesn't have to be like, it can be multiple inside your body. Your flexors and extensors help maintain your balance in the sagittal plane, and your ab and abductors help maintain your balance in the frontal plane. So maintaining balance. Okay. I'm going to go to the last one, change the effective direction in an applied force. So with this one's kind of neat in leverage, where you have, has anybody not been introduced to levers at all, like in undergraduate, or another class? Because like I could literally say, okay, for a lever, we have a fulcrum or an axis, and you have an effort arm, and you have a force, but I figured we'd already talked about moments and rotation, so I'm just getting to the nuts and bolts about what's the advantages of these things. So check it out. When you have a seesaw, when you have a lever, the rotation of every point is the same. It's the same spin. But notice, as one end is going down, the other end is going up. And as this end goes to your left, this end is going to your right. But they're all spinning in the same direction. So remember, there's a difference between translation and rotation. So within the same rotation, there's going to be a constant change in the translation, the tangential velocity, the tangential movement of both ends. So we can take advantage of that. So the analogy, like for the screwdriver, is I pull down so that the little hook goes up. I push down on one end so that the other end goes up. For our body, you guys do this all the time. Hamstrings pull the ischial tuberosity of the pelvis down so that I can come back up. Hey, cervical extension pulling muscles, pull the base of the skull down so I can look up. So within our bodies, one of the functions of a simple machine, one of the cool tricks, it's like a cool trick, like one of the cool tricks we have with some of the levers in our body is that by pulling down or pulling up, it redirects the other end so that we can do stuff. I go down to pick up my pipe and my hamstrings pull my pelvis down so that I can come up. That's what that means, redirection of an applied force. One force does something on one end and the other end goes the other way. Okay, make sense? So that's number 2. Oh yeah, absolutely. Not on your test though. I just want you to see like these basic functions. Oh yeah, 100%. All right, the 2 in the middle. Very muscle dependent. So with leverage, you can have an advantage in speed, or you can have an advantage in torque or moment. And I'm hoping you guys can start to see a trend. What you gain in one, you lose in the other, and what you gain in the other, again, movement strategy. Right? Well, when we did the strength stuff, we couldn't do it fast. And when we did the fast stuff, we couldn't do heavy loads. And so it's the same concept. So think of it like this. I'm going to use some real world analogies to hopefully make this make sense, and then we'll apply it to some muscles and some stuff that we know in the body. So if I were to, if this was a rake, okay? You know the cliche, this never happens in the real world, but in the movies it happens all the time. You step on the rake and the rake flies up super fast and smacks you in the face, okay? How that works with the leverage advantage of speed is that when I apply a force very close to the fulcrum or to the axis, when I actually step on the rake head, I only change its distance a little bit. I mean, how high is it off the ground? Not much, and then when I step on it, it's only moved a couple inches. But it's connected to the length of the other end of that rake, and so basically that far end has to go from A to B a much greater distance in the exact same amount of time as A to B for this short distance. So if you have 2 points and they both have to go from A to B in the exact same amount of time, but this one has to travel a much greater distance, who has to be moving faster? The one traveling the greater distance. That's all that is. So look, real world analogy. If I push down on this end has to move faster to go from point A to point B in the same amount of time. Point A to point B in the exact same amount of time. So the only option is for that end running on the outside lane to go fast in order to keep up. Okay? Now what's the trade-off? Well, in the advantage of speed, I have a disadvantage of torque, of moment. Right? I don't have much of a moment arm here. So my force has to be a lot to overcome to make the other side maybe fly. That's one reason why your Achilles tendon is such a thick, strong tendon, because it's pulling on that heel bone very close to your ankle axis, and you're producing huge amounts of force. And remember, you're trying to plantar flex, like when you jump off the ground, there's a speed component, like I'm trying to leave the ground fast. So to get that because it has a mechanical disadvantage in torque, it's going to make up for it by, big powerhouse to try to make up for that advantage. Okay? So advantage in speed at a disadvantage of moment. I think the advantage in moment is going to make a little bit more sense. So let's, instead of a rake, let's say I had a metal ladder. Okay, are you guys, tell me if you're not with my silly analogies and I can repeat myself. Let's say we have a metal ladder that's, it's heavy, it's metal, it's old school. If I attached a rope just like I would attach a tendon to a bone, and I said, okay, I'm gonna put my foot on one end and I'm gonna attach the rope to different rungs until I can lift the ladder up. You know what rung ain't gonna lift that ladder up? That first rung. No way. But if I could, like let's say it wasn't metal, it was light aluminum. If I could, it would make sense that it would come up really fast. But it's metal. I don't have enough strength to do that. So what do? I attach a little further. Still not enough. A little further, a little further, a little further. Let's say I'm tired of roll, I'm going to attach it to the final rung. Well, then, yeah, I could easily lift it up. But it's not going to go fast. Does that make sense? So like I can lift it up, I get the advantage of moment arm because I don't have much advantage of force. So my force multiplied by distance is going to be my moment. But as I increase moment, by default, I have to increase the amount of time that it takes me to go from point A to point B. There's no shortcut like in the third. So, if we got to use our imaginations because I don't want to let anything get this charismatic. Let's assume this door was, like Thanos says, perfectly balanced, like all things should be. So what I mean by that is the door was like on hinges that had no friction. You could just push it a little bit, it would open and close. Just let's use our imagination. We have enough live data for this now. Wouldn't it make sense that if I was trying to open that door as fast as I could, I would actually want to push close to the axis. Like I would want to push closer to the hinge if I was trying to open it as fast as I could. In fact, I could probably sling that thing open and not have to move my body at all. Does that make sense? Now, if I went further out and opened the door as fast as I could, I'd actually have to move. Like I'd literally have to be like. Now, if somebody was holding the door closed and I'm trying to get out, my older brother when I was a kid, this would be a horrible strategy for trying to get out. Then I would definitely want to try to push way out here because it doesn't matter that I sling it fast, I'm just trying to get out. You see some similarities to our movement strategies? Okay. So levers in the body can serve one or more functions of a simple machine. Balance, advantage speed at the detriment of torque or moment, advantage moment at the detriment of speed, and to redirect and apply force. Hamstrings pull the pelvis down, so everything on the other end of the lever comes up. Cool?
I have a quick question.
Yeah, what you got? It could be a slow question. Doesn't have to be quick.
Like a disadvantage of moment, you mean it takes more force to like it needs to be more, like what do you mean by that?
Okay, let me try to restate it. So moment is force times distance, perpendicular distance, right? If the force stays the same, as we increase moment because of greater perpendicular distance, that's awesome, but it's going to move slower because it's going to take forever to go around. So that's what I mean by that, is that as we create extra moment because of distance, that's just further we got to travel. And it's going to have to take more time to get to where we're getting. But the positive is if you're trying to create large moment, you don't care if you could get there fast. You're just trying to move something. Like, I'll give you an example, a practical example. Has anybody ever changed a tire and, sometimes those lug nuts are tight. And so my dad taught me how to use a piece of pipe as a cheat stick, right? So when you're unscrewing something and you have to use like a pipe, a cheat stick, it's going to help tremendously generate torque. But you know what it's not going to do? Spin that thing super fast. Like, think about all of this distance, and all that screw did was rotate that much. But at least it's moving. At least I'm starting to unscrew it. And then once I loosen it up enough, I could drop the pipe down and I could just go fast. That's kind of what I'm talking about. And it's trade-offs. It's trade-offs, trade-offs, trade-offs. So here are some examples, right? And I like this because it makes it relative to the teeter-totter, the leverage. So in this case, our erector spinae posterior to the cervical can do multiple things. It can help balance, right? Keeping our eyes level. It can help redirect if we got to move, remember, it's going to pull the base of my skull down so the front of my head looks up. It could also serve for advantage of speed and range of motion. And I'm going to tell you that because our head only doesn't weigh a ton. It's not like lifting up our head doesn't weigh a lot. So it makes sense that a little bit of pull can create a huge sweep of eye change. Because, what was that? I mean, we don't want to be like, what was that? That alien guy, right? We want to be able to move our eyes with speed. Make sense? For the test, I'm telling you this now, guys, just like movement strategies, it all comes back to what's the purpose? What's the advantage? What are you trying to get out of something? So if you hear keywords like balance, right? Or if you hear keywords like speed, if you hear keywords like change direction, so that's going to be embedded in the question for the kind of things I'm asking. Okay. And we're going to get into the different levers and why they have different advantages and stuff, but the questions will always come down to purpose. Those are the keys. All right, levers and pulleys. What I love about the getting up on your toes example of a lever is that for this one, they get it right. A lot of times people will incorrectly say the ankle is a, or the elbow is a. You have to take in all the different pieces. So even though you have ankle plantar flexion, the actual lever system itself happens on the balls of your feet. So in other words, when you pick up a wheelbarrow, your ankle is actually how your hands are pulling on the handles. That's your ankle. But the actual axis of rotation is at the wheel, right? So the axis of rotation is actually at your toes. And your gastroc is your hands, and your heel bone is the handles. So I like how this one gets it right. It's the whole system. Okay? So again, if you may say, well, then what's the motion of the ankle? And it's like, well, the motion that you have when you lift up on that wheelbarrow, there's going to be a change in your hands and the hand. That's your ankle. Okay?
What if someone were to, like, forget a wheelbarrow and dig in their heel? Would that make them more cool? Or
I don't think I understand what you mean by taking.
So like instead of being on, like whenever you lift up, we're on the balls on you. Is that just?
Oh, I thought you were literally talking about picking up a wheelbarrow.
Well, the idea of it.
Yeah. Well, now I'm on the same page. I just wanted to make sure I was seeing what
You
you're
can,
saying.
like if they do the opposite.
So like come up like this? Not much is needed for a mechanical advantage. But this is why, because coming up on my heels, that's not a lot of mass. That's not a lot of stuff, right? It only takes enough, as much force as literally to lift up the mass of my foot. But when I go up on my toes, I'm literally supporting my mass, which is super cool. I don't need big, bulky muscles in the front, but I need big, bulky muscles in the back, because it takes more to lift my whole mass up than just the mass of my foot. Does that make sense? That's a good question. I wanted to make sure I was seeing what you're asking. All good. Okay, and then an example of a third class. Now, what I like about these examples is it shows you how some of these things can be super confusing. Because the lever system in the middle is a whole system made up of things outside and things inside. Again, like the gastroc is your hands and the heel is the handle and the toes move. But if we look just at the gastroc to the ankle, you could be like, wait, that gastroc is pulling very close to that ankle. That's not a very big molar arm. That's a disadvantage in force production at the advantage of speed. Now, do you see what I'm saying? So you can look at individual muscles as levers, even though you could also look at the whole system as levers. Let me give you an example that I think you'll be able to get real quick. So if we say, hey, a push-up is kind of like a wheelbarrow, right? So I'm pushing on the ground's pushing up at me, there's the wheel, this is my stuff. But my pecs are pulling about my shoulder, there's leverage there. My elbow, my triceps pull about my elbow, there's leverage. There's levers within the levers, is what I'm trying to get to, okay? And I know it sounds like a lot, but all I'm trying to teach you is that we have to define, okay, well, how are we looking at it? What are we looking at here? Are we looking at the whole act of going up on your toes as one big system? Yeah, I'll give you a second. Are we looking at the whole act of the push-up in terms of the ground pushing on my body, moving on the toes? Yeah, I'll give you a second. But are we looking at the specific muscle that's pulling at the specific joint in a specific way? Well, now we have to look at that differently. Okay? So the picture on the right is an example of just looking at a leverage advantage of a muscle that is very specifically pulling relatively close to an axis, and it's open chain. The distal end is free to sling up like a rake. Okay? So if the elbow, if the forearm was the rake, can you see how all it takes is a little bit of shortening close to the axis to get a big sweeping range of motion on the other end? Where speed of elbow motion could come into play, like when we're running, when you're trying to swat things. But again, all you got to move it, it's not a heavy ladder. All you got to move is the distal part of your arm. It's easy to move that fast. But what if we had a muscle that instead of pulling close to the elbow, what if we had a muscle that pulled far away from the elbow? Which we do. We have a muscle that you're going to learn in the second half of this class called like the brachioradialis. It crosses the elbow and then inserts very far away at this distal side level. Well, that muscle isn't going to have the speed advantage of these others, because it has to run all the way over. But you know what? It's going to give you some advantage? Moment in torque production, because it inserts very far away. great at helping out when you need some extra help for those elbow flexors, and also great at putting on the brake of elbow extension. When I used to play basketball, the way I would shoot with my elbow out, and I'd kind of pop it wasn't a fluid motion, it was almost like kind of throwing a dart. When I would be sore the next day, it wasn't my elbow extensors, it was specifically this darn brachioradialis. Because your elbow is what we call a hard endpoint, it's bone on bone. I don't want bone to snap on bone. So when I'm done extending, I need to put on the brake immediately to stop that motion. So I'm recruiting elbow flexors in a very violent contraction to put on the brake before bone smacks up on bone. My brachioradialis, which inserts very far away, would have a great mechanical advantage of producing torque because its moment arm is far away from the elbow. Just giving you examples. Too many times when students are introduced to levers, it'll be like the elbow is a third, and then they'll only use the bicep as an analogy. And it's like, well, the bicep has an advantage of speed. That doesn't mean every muscle of the elbow has an advantage of speed. And when we go into the specific muscles of the body, it'll be similar. You have some muscles that cross your hip and insert very close to the axis, like the iliopsoas. When I'm sprinting, that muscle just needs to contract a short amount. It's a big sweeping flexion of my hip. But you know what the iliopsoas is not good? It's good at speeding up, but it's not good at putting on brakes because it doesn't have a mechanical advantage of that. So we have other muscles like the rectus femoris that crosses the hip early and insert way far over there. So when it comes time to put on the brake, that muscle is really great at being a braking muscle because it has the advantage of torque. And when you're trying to slow something down, you want a mechanical advantage to do so. Okay? So just did some examples. All right. More examples. What I wanted to show you guys here is in one picture, the advantage and the disadvantage of two different forces happening on each side of the lever. Okay? So, and I actually really like this. At Auburn, we use resistance for external forces, and then we used to use force for internal forces. That gets super confusing because it's all forces. So I actually like the verbiage of effort. Like I like that. I like effort because like it infers your muscles, right? Because your muscles are giving the effort. So I kind of dig our effort is going to be what our muscles that we do, and our load or resistance is going to be on top of that. But guys, think of this. This is really cool. Heavy rock, all right? If she wants to move that rock, she's going to utilize leverage so that she can have a large moment arm, amplify her limited force. And when I say limited, guys, we can only pull it so much more. I can only pull it for you. You can only pull it. Right? Unless we like hulk up, we are limited to how much force we could produce on things. So by having leverage, that force gets amplified by distance, and we become superhuman. But here's the trade-off. She's going to be able to move that heavy rock. It's just that rock's not going to move fast. That makes sense? Like she might be able to move it a little bit, but the distance on the other end, she's going to move it a great distance, but the distance on the other end isn't going to be a great distance. Does that make sense? Now watch this, how cool. I think it's cool. She has tremendous torque pulling it down. You can imagine. Let's pretend the rock doesn't move. It's so heavy. It's a dang moon rock or something. Can you see the advantage that that rock has? If she lets go, wow. It shows you both ends of the spectrum. The advantage in torque at the disadvantage of speed, and the advantage of speed at the disadvantage of torque. Now, when I say disadvantage of torque, disadvantage of the torque moment arm. That's a huge, heavy rock, so it compensates by being a huge force, a huge load. But the disadvantage is in the moment arm. But if she lets go, That's a catapult, Jack. Cool. And then I found this really cool short, like 4-minute little video that probably explains this stuff a lot better than I do. So I wanted to put that in there. All right. So what we are going to learn is our classifications right now. I'm going to finish before I go to pulleys. So we have first class, second class, and third class levers. First class is when the axis is in between the effort, what our bodies are doing, and the load or resistance, what gravity or the machine or whatever else. It's a classic teeter-totter. Okay? When the axis is in the middle, you can now have a couple of functions of a simple machine that you may not have in the other non-teeter-totter type of leverages. So what I mean by that is when the axis is in the middle of multiple forces, you can play the game of this goes down, that goes up, redirection of the applied force. So first class leverage arrangement in the body can redirect forces. This pulls down, that goes up. This side goes up, that goes down. In addition, first class lever arrangements in our body are outstanding at balance. Use this one. My subtalar joint is a teeter-totter. It may be upside down, but it's a teeter-totter. Here's my axis, here's my inverters, here's my everters, and I'm trying to keep gravity right in the middle. And as I wobble one way, as the bubble goes one way, my muscles are going to pull back the other. And I'm just constantly trying to keep my center of gravity over my base of support by utilizing different forces on each end of the joint. And balancing on one leg is an example, but we balance when we're on both legs. Okay. Now, first classes can favor speed or moment, but they can't do it at the same time. So an example of a first class, and this is why I have this picture, an example of a first class. Now, we don't have this so much in our bodies, but an example of a first class that's going to favor torque at the detriment of speed is for effort. The axis is in between the multiple forces. And in the same picture, an example of a first class that's going to favor speed is the rock. Not like Wayne Johnson. Okay? For our test, first class arrangements in our body mostly is to change direction of forces. Hamstrings pull down, so my body comes up. Extensors pull down, so then the eyes go up, and balance. And when I talk about second and third, it should make sense why. Okay?
Would you say balance, but not at the same time? Is there any situation where it would just be just balance? Like any situation?
Oh yeah. Well, when we redirect something, that means we're going to move, right? So like when I say that my hamstrings pull my pelvis down so that I can come up, that's movement. But you don't have to necessarily have significant motion when you're balancing. You know, like if I'm just balancing here. But if I'm doing both, so like I'm redirecting an applied force at my hip, but at the same time I'm using my hip ab and adductors to help me balance. So you can't have two different purposes happening at the same time. But if you slot it, it should still not be confusing. The balance stuff was happening so that I didn't fall over. And the redirection was happening so that I could come back up. It's pulling down so that I can come back up. So hamstrings pulling down so that I could come back up isn't balance. Me maintaining my center of mass over my foot is balance. So even though they can happen at the same time, they serve two different masses. Good question. All right. Second and third class is when, instead of the axis being in between our different influences, you're going to have the axis on one end. So let's say in the elbow example, you're going to have an axis, you're going to have the axis, then you're going to have your effort, whether it's you or your muscles in this case, and then you're going to have your load and resistance. So we're just rearranging the sequence of the pieces. But what I want you to see, though, I think this is cool. Our advantage is going to be our effort. It's us or our muscles, because we're moving, we're doing these things. Right? So when I talk about advantages, it's going to be our advantages. But I just use that as an example that as I get an advantage in something, the resistance is going to have that trade-off, right? Okay. For a third class, you're going to have axis, then effort, then load and resistance, which means the load and resistance will always have a greater moment arm than your effort. Your effort moment arm will always be smaller than your resistance. And it has to be if the effort is closer to the axis. That makes sense? So in a third class arrangement, because your effort will always have a smaller moment arm than the load or resistance, that means you're going to have an advantage that the other one doesn't have by default. Your effort advantage is going to be speed, because your moment arm is smaller. Therefore, your movement is going to force the other side to go faster. So third class arrangements in our body always favor speed and range of motion, because the effort moment arm will always be closer than the resistance load moment. Think about it. This comes in handy during mosquito season, right? Like trying to get those mosquitoes. Like you want a short contraction of your tricep to create a sweeping range of motion. See? The third sped me up, but the second slowed me down. Okay. So third class arrangements for our body will always favor speed and range of motion for that reason. Well, if third classes always favor speed and range of motion, it should make sense when our effort is further away than the resistance load, then those advantages are going to swap. When our effort is farther away from the axis than the resistance load, then we're going to have this torque advantage, this moment arm advantage, but it can't go fast. That's the trade-off. And I'm going to end with a couple really cool electromyography studies to try to hit home what I'm talking about. How many of you guys, well, let me give you a fact. So our gastrocnemius, right, our calf muscle, it crosses our knee and our ankle. When we go through muscles, I'm going to show you the origins and the insertions, and I'm going to take note. So our knee is a knee flexion puller. So our hamstrings, okay? They both cross the knee posteriorly in the back. The hamstrings, if I was doing open chain knee flexion extension, the hamstrings have a third class advantage at the knee when I'm moving the knee like a hinge. Because all those hamstrings have to do is shorten a little bit, and the end of my foot has to. Okay. But the gastrocnemius does not have a third class advantage. It crosses the knee early and it pulls way over there. So if I'm trying to flex my knee fast, the gastrocnemius is like, dude, I can't keep up with you, hamstrings. And that's been confirmed in electromyography. People that flex their knees fast, all of the knee flexion puller muscles get recruited except for the gastroc. The gastroc stays silent. It's a knee flexion puller, but it doesn't get recruited because it can't keep up. it can't contract fast enough to keep up with those other third classes. Think of Usain Bolt as a third class runner. Okay? I cannot choose to run as fast as Usain Bolt. But you know what's really weird? Usain Bolt can choose to run as slow as me. So what we're going to see is when we do high effort things that have to be done slowly, we can use all of our muscles with any type of leverage. Because anything can help when we're going slow, but not everything can help when we're going fast. Usain Bolt could choose to jog, but I can't choose to sprint like Usain Bolt. All right, guys, y'all, we're going.